So Helen Abson-Meyer, obviously she was the original author of the story, and she was a social worker in New York City at the time. And she obviously worked with lots of different children, and as a result of that, she ended up writing many different children's books. However, unfortunately, Dumbo was the only one that ended up getting published, and also she didn't really get that much money from it, right? So when it was sold to Disney, it says in the history of it that she may have got, right? I'm very dubious about that, may have got, right? So she may have got $1,000, some royalties, and some credit rights for the thing, right? So not an awful lot considering like how big the film would end up being, but that's kind of the sad things about like the story of the creator at times, yeah, like that people often don't end up getting the credit that they really deserve. So in terms of how it got brought to Walt Disney's attention, right, in late 1939, Kay Kamen, who was the head of merchandise licensing for Disney, right, Kay ended up bringing it forward to Disney, and Disney was just blown away by the story. It was such a just beautiful story. It was so simple, right? And they was like, right, we have to make this into a film. However, originally it was just going to be a short film, but they decided to do the story justice. They were going to make it a feature-length film. And they got the same writers who they had in Fantasia. So this is Dick Humer and Joe Grant. He got them to write the script for it. Now, how they wrote the script for it was very, very unusual, right? So I, as a like fellow script writer, I was also very interested by this, right? So they wrote a 102-page basically script with chapters in it, similar to a book. Now that's very, very unusual, right? Normally you wouldn't do that. But within that kind of 2-month period where they were writing this, right, they obviously stuck to the original story, but they added on a few things, as obviously people tend to do. So for instance, the Storks was an add-on because they wanted to kind of tell the story of like how Dumbo came to Miss Jumbo, like in a kind of like cute way and stuff. Also like the pink elephant sequence, that was also added in. Mrs. Jumbo was originally in the story called Mother Ella, but they decided to call her Mrs. Jumbo, like just to make it a bit more of like a comical name and stuff, and a bit more like elephant-like. And then also you had the character of Timothy the Mouse, right? So in the original story, it's a robin called Red, but they decided, like we said, because of the whole kind of dynamics with like, you know, mice and elephants and stuff, right? They decided it would kind of bring a different dimension to it if they had a thing where the elephant ends up befriending the mouse rather than being scared of it. And then also, finally, the last add-on was with regard to the crows. So Disney originally wanted there to just be one crow, but this ended up morphing over time into 5 crows, right? So it's a gang of crows. I think that's actually the name for multiple crows. I think it's a gang, I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, so that kind of explains the story of the creator and all the kind of like creative processes that went into making it. So now talking about the story of the studio, right? So as we've said with some of our other videos talking about Disney, at the time, this is 1941, and this is when you had the Disney animator strike, right? So actually, like we said, like we've got to the clowns, when they go, oh, we're gonna ask the big boss for a raise. That's actually a parody, and that's kind of a dig at the people who are going on strike at that time for Disney, right? So yeah, so that's kind of having a dig at that. So you had the animator strike, you had the budget constraints because of like, you know, the overspending for Pinocchio and for Fantasia, and for like, you know, the limited revenue that they end up getting in. So from the very beginning, they decided that Dumbo was going to be a really scaled back film. And also as well, on top of that, because they were working on Bambi, which was to come out the next year, they didn't have the capacity to put the best animators into the film. So that's why, you know, a lot of the kind of animation in it is quite sloppy. That's because they got the youngest, like least experienced animators on set, like to actually like kind of like do the drawing for us, right? And obviously it was like checked over and stuff, but there's lots of times when you look at it and go, you could have done with a little bit more work and stuff. But the whole idea of doing Dumbo was that from the very beginning, it was meant to be a short, low budget film, right? So all the kind of like extravagant costs that went into all the other ones, it was like, nope, we're scaling back all of that. We're just going to make a quick and a simple film. So while they may have cut costs with regard to the animation, they didn't cut costs with regard to the casting, right? So the casting for the film had many different people in it who would be in other Disney films as well, and also just in other things in general. Although it should be noted that just like for many other Disney films in those days, all of the characters are uncredited, yeah, or rather, all the actors are uncredited. So it's a bit, I don't know why they used to do that in those days, but anyway, maybe it kind of took away some of the magic of it. Don't know, but anyway. So in terms of the voice actors, right? Dumbo, just like for Dopey in Snow White, and just like many other characters back in those days with Disney, he's mute. So there's no one to play his voice. He's just a mute, well, just a mute character, right? However, in terms of the voice of Timothy the Mouse, this is done by comedian Edward Brophy. So he's kind of like this wise guy, kind of like New York accent and stuff, right? So obviously gives that kind of like a dynamic, and quite a lot of the dialogue is centered around like things that he says and stuff, and little quirks that of like how he kind of says things. Then in terms of the voice of the main elephant, so this is like the matriarch elephant. This is done by Verna Felton, and so her voice is in lots of different Disney films, such as Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and Jungle Book. And then also you have Sterling Holloway, who is the voice of Mr. Stork, and his voice is in Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Jungle Book, Aristocats, and also he is the voice of Winnie the Pooh, which is quite interesting. Obviously, Winnie the Pooh would come much later, but yeah, so he's the voice of Winnie the Pooh, and that's also Mr. Stork. And then, as we said with our video looking at Pinocchio, right? So you have Cliff Edwards, who's the voice of Jiminy Cricket, and he is the voice of Dandy Crow. And then finally, you have James Baskett, and he plays Fats Crow. So James Baskett, you see him on screen in Song of the South. We're going to cover that in a few weeks' time. But yeah, so he is the voice of Uncle Remus, right? Well, not just the voice, he is Uncle Remus, right? So that kind of explains the story of the studio. And now we're going to be talking about the themes and the history of Dumbo. So obviously the main overarching theme within this is motherly love. Yeah, you can really see this throughout the film. There's this kind of a really cute kind of like showing of like just how affectionate like the love between Miss Jumbo and Dumbo is, and also as well obviously the classic kind of like baby mind scene really kind of helps to solidify that. Also as well, another archetypal kind of like theme that they have within this is the idea of the kind of the outsider, right? And he's ostracized by the rest of his society, but the very thing that makes him like ostracized in the first place is a thing that then eventually turns him into the hero of the story, right? So that's also kind of a kind of theme that you kind of say. I don't know exactly how you would put it into a particular theme, but yeah. Also as well, the fact that in terms of the history of it, right? I think that it was quite pivotal probably in the animal welfare kind of movement and like the animal rights movement, because obviously in those days people used to go to a circus, they'd see animals, and no one ever really thought about how the animals were treated. And so I think that Dumbo is quite an early depiction of how animals are mistreated oftentimes in circuses and just in general and stuff, right? So more likely than not, it had quite a big impact in how people viewed animals. And there's even a bit in the thing where like the clowns go, oh, you're going to hurt the little guy. And they go, no, like elephants ain't got no feelings. They're made out of rubber. It's like, obviously, like they're a sentient being. Obviously, they're going to have feelings and stuff. You can't just drop them out of a building and they're not going to feel anything, right? So there's that. And also as well, because it's the early 1940s, there's the obvious thing where there's racial stereotypes, right? So just, yeah. So first of all, obviously you have the fact that nearly all of the laborers in the circus are African American. You don't really see their faces much, but the song that they have when they're singing about like their work and stuff is they work all day, work all night, and then like they get their money and they basically spend it on just stupid things like drink or whatever, right? And then there's the line within that song of, grab that rope, Harry. I mean, it can't get any more on the nose than that, can it? It's just very, oh my god, like that could never be done nowadays. That nothing like that could ever have. What? Like, how is that an acceptable thing to write? Who wrote that? That's just what. Anyway, so you have that, and obviously also the Crows is straight out of a black and white minstrel show, right? So, Dandy Crow, who's like the main crow, like we said, his original name in it was going to be Jim Crow. So Jim Crow is obviously the all the different like kind of like racial segregation laws that they had in America, but Jim Crow was a character, or was originally a character, a fictional character from the black and white minstrel shows that they had, yeah, where white people would dress up as black people and imitate them and basically take the mick out of them, right? So that was, it's very, very on the nose. And also, while it's good in a way that 4 of the 5 crows are voiced by black actors, Dandy Crow, like we said, is voiced by Cliff Edwards, who's a white guy. So it's a white guy pretending to be black and imitating how black people in the South like to speak and stuff, right? So it's very, yeah, it's very, very just a product of its time, let's just say, right? And this is where it kind of ties into when we talk about the legacy now, right? So I can kind of see why Tim Burton, yeah, when he did a remake of it in 2019, left all of that other stuff out, right? Because it's very just, wow, yeah. It's unnecessary. It doesn't add anything. Well, you know what, actually, the crows, they're so... Dandy Crow should have just been black, right? Okay, that might have ironed some things out, because it's a nice song they do, and they're kind of funny characters and stuff, yeah, but it's just too on the nose, like, just no. And I can kind of see also why Disney Plus, they have Dumbo still, but it's restricted to people who are over the age of 7, and it comes with a warning of like racial insensitivity and stuff. Because even as like a little kid, you watch it and go, this is just not okay in the 21st century. It's just what. But in spite of all that stuff, the film was a roaring success. Like we said in our other videos.